Sebastian Page is the head of global multi-asset, and he's the chief investment officer with Rowe Price, and he is the author of The Psychology of Leadership. Welcome to the show, Seb.
Thank you, George. I'm super excited for this today.
Yeah, I'm
I'm
excited to have.
pumped.
Yes, let's go. Tell us about your personal lives, more about your work, and what motivated you to put pen to paper and write the book.
So, like you, I work in money management and I'm also very interested in positive psychology and self improvement. So, I think this is a really good match, and I'm excited to talk about this with you today. The book, really, I wrote it. First of all, I have a writing addiction. It just, I just love writing. Second, I wanted to improve myself as a leader. And there's a quote in there at the beginning where I say to my reader, "You're reading this book for self improvement. I wrote it for the same reason."
Hmm.
Now, as I dug into the research, and I'm a research nerd as well, certified research nerd, I just got so excited and started thinking, wow, this is really going to help people and it's going to make people think differently about what it means to be a leader, what it means to be resilient. It's not just about leadership. You don't need to actually manage people to benefit from the book. And I'll tell you, George, I didn't do it for the money. I know you publish books. I read a stat that 81% of Americans at one point in their lifetime want to write a book.
Hmm.
And then I read another one, which I don't believe, but I can't find a better number, that English nonfiction books, there are between 500,000 to 1 million published a year. I don't
Wow.
really believe that stat, but that's what I can find. So, it's a tough business. I won't quit my day job, but really, that's the answer. I did it to improve myself, and then I started digging into it and thought, wow, it's really going to help people. That's really what I'm after with the publication.
Making people feel differently. I think that when you realize that you can do that, it's a pretty powerful thing.
Yeah, and one of the big findings in the book is how you have to embrace some anxiety and stress in your life.
Hmm.
And it sounds trite, but that's a big deal when you really look at the research and get your head around it. And I think that's super important. George, optimal performance does not happen at a stress level of zero. We all try to push the stress and anxiety away, but high performance, and I've learned this from sports psychology in particular, comes at a certain stress level. And for leaders, we want the leaders to be unflappable. We want them to be cool under pressure. But really, it's first of all impossible in certain situations not to feel some level of stress. Sports psychologists call it something else. They kind of reframe it as a broader concept. They'll call it activation instead of stress, or arousal, which is more of a scientific term. But that's the idea. And that was a big deal for me to write about this, to learn about this, and to integrate it in my life.
Such an interesting thing that we love competition and we love sports and we love the first minute of the game, but we really love the last minute when it is pressurized. There is anxiety. Is it going to work? And everybody's on the edge of their seat. So why do I ignore that in my day-to-day life, even though I'm not on TV competing for a championship?
Right. So imagine you're the basketball player and there's 4 seconds left on the clock. You have to make a 3-point shot to win the game. Do you think there's no like, activation, anxiety, stress involved? And then we go about in life, and there is something to it. There's also research that shows that stress is bad. It's going to kill you. Look at your cortisol level. And if you're chronically stressed, it's really bad for you. But we generalize that to, I should not be stressed. And for me, this was a big part of my life. Why am I feeling anxious right now? I should be tougher. I should be cool about going on live national TV right now to get my investment ideas debated. But sports psychology tells you, first of all, it's impossible. Second, there's an optimal point. That is fascinating. And these are called Yerkes Dodson's curve. There have been research It's a whole interesting story about psychology here, where these things have been researched for 80 years, starting on Japanese dancing mice. Anyways, you can look this up in the book. But the curve says there's a point of activation, anxiety, stress that will give you optimal performance. Beyond that, you choke, or it's detrimental to your health. And those depend on your makeup as a person. Your optimal point would be different than your neighbors. They also depend on the type of task. Some task you'll peak your activation level if you need a lot of concentration. If you do archery at a lower level, if you do powerlifting, George, there's basically no amount of adrenaline like that I can get you all riled up that will reach the choke point. You actually kind of want to maximize the stress for that kind of task. And that is not just sports. It's kind of everywhere in life and business.
I love that term optimal because it certainly makes sense. Too little, not quite enough. If I'm not excited about this, whatever I'm doing, if I'm not going to get activated, I'm not going to perform well, but I also don't want to hit that tipping point where it's too much. So how do I know? How do I find that?
One of my favorite stories, I tell a lot of stories in the book that I came across when I was studying neuroticism, which is a personality trait that kind of defines how anxious you tend to get in life generally. It's a story of the first manned moon landing. It's a well-known story, right? We sent a man to the moon, and Neil Armstrong famously, everybody knows the story where he says it's a small step for a man, a giant leap for humanity. But there's a part of that story that's really interesting about stress and activation and being cool under pressure. Everything went wrong famously. The computer stopped working, the communication systems went down, the lunar module basically ran out of fuel and it veered off course. And that Armstrong took control and landed the thing. The fascinating part, the little tidbit I saw, is that he was, as an astronaut, was hooked to a heart rate monitor. George, his average heart rate for most of that mission, when everything was going wrong, 75.
Hmm,
This is resting heart rate for a lot of people.
right.
And it did peak at 150 when he actually landed. But so, yeah, we all want to be like, that would be quote unquote optimal. We all want to be like Neil Armstrong and be cool under pressure and perform. And a lot of this comes with practice. But you have to embrace the fact that your optimal is going to be different from Neil Armstrong. And some people are just geared. My brother-in-law jumps out of planes. I went mountain biking with him. Never been so scared in my life. He would just go down the hill. He had never seen the trails too. So some people will just have different stress curves. So optimal is different for who you are as a person. And the interesting part of it from a self-improvement perspective is you can move that optimal point. You can work on that. And plenty of techniques that you can get from sports psychology, whether it's breathing, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's exposure. The more you repeats, the more you do something. But you can't just go around in life trying to have zero stress, zero anxiety. That's just not. It doesn't work. And a really nice quote from Tim Ferriss I like. He says, "Embracing stress is like a superpower." That really resonated with me. And in the book I write, now we can all stop stressing about stressing because it
Eh,
compounds.
Oh, now we can stop stressing about stressing because you're never going to get rid of it. And
Yeah,
trying to get rid of it is a fool's errand, and it's probably going to stress you out more.
yeah, absolutely.
That's so funny that, and we were talking offline that certainly you're in an industry that was wrought with rejection, and so you get the idea of, oh, I'm going to get rejected today. That's going to increase your level of stress and your level of anxiety, and when it's happening, and you're looking for it, and when's it going to happen. So if you're trying to avoid those feelings as well, it's not a winning strategy.
Yeah, and it's accepting. I wrote this in the book. There is an anxiety cost to high performance. So accepting that, I think, is going to help you perform better and be more resilient. And at the same time, you have to reframe the anxiety. And that's what sports psychology does. I mean, I consulted with a sports psychologist for this research, and he told me, look, pro athletes are all extremely neurotic. They get really nervous. And watch any documentary, they get really nervous. But there's a reframing, whether you call it activation, excitement, adrenaline, and the ability to reframe this is also part of building resilience. And there's another strand of research about how I realize sports psychology is actually not about winning. It's all about losing. It's all about what you do when you lose. And there's a link with money management here because in money management, you can't really control everything. You can't control what markets are going to do. You can control your process. And that's the same for athletes. They can control their process, how they train, but on the day of, they don't know what their opponents are going to do. They don't know how the referees are going to judge certain things. So you have to differentiate between luck and skill, something Annie Duke wrote about. So that's a huge link between the world of money management and sports psychology that I explore a little bit in the book.
That's really interesting, isn't it? That performing at a high level is difficult enough, but then there's all these additional variables, and we can stick with sports because it just I think we all understand it. Imagine playing golf and not thinking that there's going to be external conditions. Like every different shot you hit, you might have a bad lie. It might be windy out. There might be, who knows, some mud on your golf ball, and all these things are going to change it. So if you're a neurotic person, I, my goodness, that would you definitely need to reframe all that.
And George, golf is a prime example in the literature in sports psychology. And there's a difference between the ego orientation for athletes, which is I want a low handicap, I want my name on the board, I want a trophy, and the mastery orientation, which is, oh my God, this is so exciting. My swing just got better. That's the mastery orientation. And by the way, we all have some ego orientation. Let's not fool ourselves here. But the ability to bring in some mastery orientation in what you do, and that's applicable to the workplace too. Yeah, are our meetings efficient? Are we fostering a culture in the workplace that let the best ideas surface? Are we efficient in how we spend our time? These are all mastery process goals that kind of go by the wayside in business because we're all obsessed with the scoreboard, with the KPIs, with the revenues, the quarterly revenues, and so on. So from ego to mastery is something I explore in the book. And a big part of this, George, this is kind of the origin story. I sat down with the sports psychologist. His name is Dr. Daniel Zimmett, is in Maryland where I am. And I just asked him about his work in sports psychology. And he goes into a story of his best match ever. So not only is he a sports psychologist, he also has 40 national titles in the sport of handball.
Hmm.
This is like squash, but you walk the ball with your hands. Like people play this in prison and in other places. It's a really interesting sport. He has 40 national titles. So
Nice.
he's a PhD sports psychologist, but also an athlete. So he starts telling me this story about his best match ever. And it's like 15 years ago, he was playing a stronger opponent. And he knows everything about that match, point by point, he's telling me. I ended up writing that story in the intro of the book. And there's a point where he's on his knees, the crowd is yelling, he makes the extreme shot. And it's a complete letdown because it turns out he goes, oh, then I lost the next 2 points.
Hmm.
I go, what? You lost the game? And he goes, yeah, I lost the game. But to him, that was completely irrelevant. His best match ever was when he played against a stronger player and realized he had made a step function in his skills as a player. That's sort of an extreme illustration of the mindset. You talk about rejection when you try to publish a book. Like, what do you learn from being rejected when you try to publish a book, and how do you use it? He takes it to an extreme. It's like, this is my best match. I lost it. This is my best match I ever played.
Yeah, I think that that's extraordinary. Somebody just sent me a video of Roger Federer talking about how he won over 80% of his matches, but only won 54% of all the points. So the
Yeah.
best who's ever done it, top five or whatever, barely wins half the points.
Yeah, and I actually have that anecdote in the book because he went viral. I mean, he taught this was a commencement speech to students, and his takeaway was no matter what game you play in life, you're going to lose. 1,500 matches he played. He actually won about 80% of them, but only 54% of the points.
hmm it's extraordinary. I love the reframing or the thinking about ego versus mastery and mastery orientation, and then winning versus process goals. I remember if it was Tiger Woods or a different professional golfer, they probably all go through this, but just stick with Tiger. He was on the top of the golf world, the best to ever do it, on the way to break all the records, and he changed his swing. I mean, what a crazy thing from an outside observer. Like, oh my gosh, you're winning everything. Why would you do that? Well, he's thinking way beyond just, winning more. He wants to continue to evolve and get better and master the game.
And there's just so many analogies in business life too, because things change, the competition change. So the equivalent of changing your swing in business would be, a company who's making a product that is kind of, going out in popularity when some other product is taken over. So Netflix going from mailing CDs to then doing streaming video. That's kind of like Netflix changing their swing. Maybe I'm forcing the analogy a little bit, but that is a great illustration of the mastery orientation. Look, it all sounds great. We all want to win, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with the motivation to win. The point is, we can't let that take over our entire motivational approach. And we have to understand the goal of mastery. And really, it's all about just getting excited about it. Like at work, if I can make my organization more efficient by 10%, I get really excited about this. And it's got nothing to do with our assets under management growth numbers. It's like, oh wow, we're more efficient. We're getting better at what we do. We're more efficient at uncovering insights in the markets, for example.
I think it makes so much sense. And you talked earlier about feeling differently and helping people to feel differently. And so I think that that's such a wonderful example. Instead of just focusing on wins, so to speak, it's let's focus on constant improvement and refining and looking inward and saying, what can I be doing different to continue to do more winning if that's what I want, but to focus on just to shift that focus. Um, I think it's when you think about it, it's almost obvious, but it's extremely profound in the simplicity, but that's not easy to do at all.
Yes. And that's why you need to think of practical ways to become more mastery oriented in your life and more resilient. A big thing about sports psychology for me was about just resilience and going back to this idea of embracing stress as a superpower and finding the optimal level of activation for optimal performance. But there's nothing wrong with social comparison either. Well, there. Let me rephrase that. There is something wrong with social comparison. It's apparently research shows it's like 10% of our thoughts. 10% of your thoughts, research in psychology says, is you're comparing yourself to other,
Hmm.
you're looking at your ranking, you're looking at how good looking you are, and so on. Um, and it can be taken to an extreme. But again, there's so many counterintuitive things you find when you dig into research and psychology that social comparison can be an amazing source of motivation, right? So I don't want our listener to come away and say, "Oh, they're just talking about not caring at all about winning." That doesn't really make sense. And in fact, I'm a runner, right? So that's an intrinsic motivation. Like no one, you go out running, it's cold outside. There's not, you're on your own. There's no ego involved. Like you're not impressing anybody at the beach with your low heart rate and skinny arms, right? I mean, it's like, so, but, but, and this is what there's so much nuance in this research, but I run my best times when I'm in a race. And there's a way to sort of gamify your approach. I'll give you an example in business, George. We're looking at applications of artificial intelligence. How am I going to get new ideas to generate efficiency with artificial intelligence in my organization? Where here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use social comparison to a good end as a motivational tool in a healthy way. I'm going to give everybody in my division 3 months to identify efficiencies. I'm going to give them access to AI tools, and it's going to be a contest, and we're going to have three winners. And we're going to make it fun and somewhat gamify it, but it's serious work of finding efficiencies and again going back to mastery process, getting our process to be more efficient. But there's a social comparison aspect that I'm using to a positive end here.
That makes a ton of sense. And certainly in the world of asset management, we're always benchmarking. And that's sort of like comparison.
I mean, it's built around it. And if you think about it, sometimes we take it to an extreme, which is not necessarily productive, right? It's how do you do relative to your peers versus how do you do, and I know you're more into the financial planning side, how do you do relative to helping your clients achieve their long-term goals? So your asset allocation decision might be more important from that perspective. So again, my point is this. Social comparison is really powerful. It clearly has downsides. It actually leads to depression. Like if you spend your days on getting getting social comparison through your veins on Instagram, on Facebook, like if you spend your days doing this, it's not healthy. And it's kind of coming out now that even the providers of these platforms know it's not healthy, especially for teens. So, yeah, it's a powerful tool. You can use it for good. You have to be mindful of the side effects. I study billionaires in the book. I think they're fascinating. They all have some extreme thing in their lives. And the more you study billionaires, I've read like maybe all the biographies of billionaires out there. The more you study them, they're all pretty bad at relationships.
Hmm.
And especially if the book was written by someone who did the biography and who it was like unauthorized or not reviewed. Like even Steve Jobs, for example, said to Isaacson, write my biography, talk to people. I'm not going to have editorial oversight. So it's fascinating, right? What motivates billionaires? And there's these examples where Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are comparing their space exploration efforts. And there's like some funny exchanges on Twitter or X about, hey, I Bezos would say, hey, I landed a rocket, like I self-landed a rocket. This is very rare. And then Musk responds, well, we've done this 10 times already. And you can see they're not motivated by money. Like, how can you be motivated by money when you have all the money in the world? Like,
Right.
there's nowhere you're going to spend all of this. So it's interesting to dig into, again, the downsides and the upsides of what else motivates them. And it shows that social comparison is a driving force for a lot of them.
Which is so powerful, and I guess it's humanizing that everybody is in a lot of ways pretty much the same.
Yeah. And George, let me ask you this. Like you have a popular podcast, right? Do you spend time, and not to put you on the spot, but I will. Do you spend time looking at your ratings? Your ratings for this podcast are unbelievable. They're like 5.0. Like, how do you react to that? How often do you refresh the ratings versus how often do you think, oh, how do I get better at asking questions?
Well, I certainly do track the metrics, the downloads, all that kind of stuff, but it doesn't do anything for me at all. Kind of like your story about the gentleman playing handball. I am really interested in having a better conversation and bringing new information out of a guest that maybe hasn't come out. I'm interested in giving every guest the best interview that they're going to have. So that's for sure what I'm interested in and focused on.
So pure mastery, very little ego, uh, is how I would summarize that. Um, yeah, look, I think there's a little bit there are two sides to a lot of these things. And when I think about the book and the leadership aspect of it, there's so many things that we think leaders should be and should be able to do. So we say, oh, leaders should be outstanding communicators. I give that advice to students. We say leaders should be decisive. We say leaders should be resilient in the face of adversity and not give up. And and on and on. And when I look at the nuance, and I actually find in a lot of cases, it's the exact opposite. On decisiveness, strategic patience is a very rare and important skill for leaders. On being an inspiring communicators, the higher you go in the organization, the more you're listening, not talking. Your listening skills matter. I've actually had to learn this. And on like sticking to it, actually is the most prized, most difficult skill for leaders to develop is the ability to quit things that aren't working
Hmm.
when they've invested a lot in them. And Annie Duke has done phenomenal work on this. She has a book titled Quit. So every time you look at something and you look at the popular narrative, whether it's stress or social comparison or what leaders should do, there's always another way to look at it, which is kind of how I've structured the book. I hope it'll give people some counterintuitive findings and ideas.
Well, I love it. I think it's going to. And Seb, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you so much for writing the book. Where can we get our copy of The Psychology of Leadership?
So, best way to get it is on Amazon. It's everywhere on every bookseller's website, and I hope people will enjoy it. There's a lot of stories in there. It's an easy read. There's also research, and so should be a breeze to read, but there should be some nutrition in there too.
I love it. Well, if you enjoyed as much as I did, show Seb your appreciation and share today's show with a friend who also appreciates good ideas. Get your copy of The Psychology of Leadership wherever you buy your books, certainly Amazon, and dig in, find your optimal, start feeling a little bit differently, and start managing stress better and embrace the mastery orientation. Thanks again, Seb.
Thank you, George.
Till next time, remember, do your part by doing your best.